I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Super excited to have this conversation with Maggie Jackson. She's the author of Uncertain. I've got a list of awards this book won last year. I discovered it through the Next Big Idea Club, a group that Malcolm Gladwell, Susan Cain, Dan Pink, and Adam Grant put together. And that Next Big Idea Club picks I think 3 or 4 books a year that they say, this is a really, really important book to read. And but then it was chosen as the 2024 Nonfiction Book of the Year by the independent publishers. It was nominated for a National Book Award. It was on many people's top 25 lists. It was on my top 10, maybe top 5 books I read last year. So important in my thinking, and I think so relevant to anybody who's leading. And I think it's more relevant today than it was 3 years ago because the impulse for certainty is pretty strong. But she also wrote other books that are also of great importance. Distracted really sparked a global conversation about how we use our attention and what we do. And she's shaping people's thinking. She's done work written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, On Point, Fox Gray, all kinds of organizations. And I'm so grateful for your time here. The other book is What's Happening to Home. And you see those 3 books, Uncertain, Distracted, and What's Happening to Home, as kind of a trilogy. So although I want to focus on Uncertain, I'm certain I want to talk about certainty. I wonder if you could tell us about those 3 books and how they fit together as a trilogy.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's so funny. I didn't actually even realize that I was writing a trilogy until I got midway through Uncertain. But I've always been, kind of drawn to big, messy social topics, and really what knits these 3 works together. One about the nature of home in the digital age. The second, Distracted, about the erosion of attention and what is attention after all. What is human attention? And the third about uncertainty. These are all topics that are highly misunderstood, and yet they're woven into the fabric of our everyday life. The science of, particularly for distraction, attention, uncertainty, these topics haven't really been studied seriously. So the discoveries are new, and they're overturning our understanding, of what it means to be unsure, and actually what are the workings of attention. How does attention work, and how we can utilize this information in a very fragmented age. So that they really are a trilogy.
Yeah, the distracted. I think the idea of how we use our attention is a fundamental question because our lives are lived in what we pay attention to. And if we're distracted and if we're diffuse in the way we're looking at the world, we'll miss really important things. And we'll look back and say, I've missed my life because I was too busy looking at something on my phone instead of seeing the first steps of a child in front of me or whatever is good. And I also think there's a general apathy around justice and politics right now. And my completely ignorant theory is it's because people are distracted. Things that we would have been up in arms about right now pass by because we're too busy checking out what's the latest reel on Instagram or something. So I think the distracted one is really critical. And I also think thoughts about home are critical. So I'm excited to go deeper into that. And maybe I'll bring you back if I can convince you to talk about distracted because I think it's such an important topic. But I do want to focus on this book, Uncertain, and it speaks to me, our times when the temptation to be uncertain is huge. So I think when things are chaotic, and right now things are economically, politically chaotic, there are all kinds of things that are going on, the urge for certainty is even stronger. But you talk about being careful about ready, fire, sureness. It has a certain allure, but it's not really a good thing. And so why is uncertainty actually not a good thing? Or why is uncertainty actually a good thing, not something to rush away from? Why should we be uncertain?
Yes, yeah. No, those are big questions and big topics, and they couldn't be more important. I agree with you. I mean, studies show that today, for instance, there seems to be a rising intolerance of uncertainty, which is actually a kind of psychological term for being afraid of the unknown. And we see the dogmatism, the certitude by leaders. This is exactly what we think of as being successful in a leader, is to be absolutely sure in an instant, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that when we are uncertain, when we're unsure, we're opening up the space between question and answer. Now, there is a place for instant judgment. There's a place for acting really swiftly. I mean, honestly, when you're, see a kid drowning in a pool, of course you've got to be instant, or you see the tiger in the forest and of course you've got to react instantly. But that's kind of one situation and one half of our, thinking as humans. And we really act well in situations of just sheer survival, very almost primitive, I would say. And we act well instantly when we know the drill. That's what heuristic thinking is. When you already when life is predictable, when life is routine, you can jump, go for it. But it's when we're in these times of flux and volatility, if you think about it, that's when we do need to be unsure. Unsureness means exploring the options.
Mm.
Sureness means seeing the nuances, not your first impression. First impressions across all categories of human life are usually insufficient and often erroneous. Uncertainty is highly related. Scientists show that's highly related to curiosity, to open-mindedness, to resilience, to mental well-being. So these are exactly the kind of cognitive skill sets we need today. Hands down, we really need to be harnessing this skill, not dreading and running away from it.
One of the things I love about the book, I'm just going to keep being effusive about how much I like this book because it's intellectually intriguing and psychologically it draws you in, and then it has such a powerful message. But one of the things I like about the book, it's not superficial. It's a deep exploration of the topic, and there are a lot of things you talk about. This topic could have been handled superficially, but you didn't do that. You gave us a much more substantial book. And one of the things you talk a lot about is neuroscience and how we don't actually like to feel uncertain. And your discussion of the neuroscience of that was really interesting. So what does neuroscience tell us about why we don't like to be uncertain?
Sure. Well, one of the most proven psychological findings is that humans dislike uncertainty. People in studies would rather have they'd rather know that an electric shock is coming in a small, laboratory experiment, than than be unsure of whether or not it's coming. They're more stressed by not knowing. But we really need to dig into this to understand the truth of the matter. It's normal to dislike uncertainty. We always will. It's not a picnic because we evolved to need and want answers, right? Resolution is the
Right.
game. We don't want to be left in limbo. When I say opening up the space between question and answer, I don't mean just remaining there. No. But at the same time, we have to move away from this allergy, this fear and dread of uncertainty, because, and here's where the great neuroscience about uncertainty, just to put it very simplistically, is good stress. So when you do meet something in those unusual situations, different kind of new predicaments, something ambiguous is happening, that's when your body and brain begin to instigate a stress response. Emergency room doctors who are unsure actually report heightened attention. This is one of the markers of uncertainty. And that, of course, helps them perform better. When they're unsure in sticky situations, their focus sharpens. And that's exactly what happens to us. Our working memory gets better. Our brain becomes more receptive to new data. And so this is good stress. The discomfort is actually something to lean into, not to dread and fear. And as one neuroscientist told me, uncertainty is the brain telling itself there's something to be learned here.
Well, that's a
So,
great phrase.
yeah, we live in this society. Maybe it's a big generalization, but I think it's fairly true, that backs away from discomfort, that wants things that are click. We don't want to be uncomfortable. but uncertainty is the pathway to getting the better, not the first insufficient answer.
Well, it's a little bit like learning. If you just keep doing the same things, it feels comfortable, but real learning happens when you're pushed outside your comfort zone. So someone in an organization, someone who moves from being a teacher to a principal in a school has a whole new set of things, and there's going to be issues around, lack of confidence, and because you're doing stuff you've never done before. But then at the end of it, when you look back, you go, look at how much more I can accomplish with my life because I've learned. And I think that's part of that is uncertainty. You're you're in you're in situations where you really don't know what you can do anyway, so it's going to be uncertain. And you said a lot about this already, but could you say more about what are the dangers of the rush to certainty?
Well, absolutely. I've already mentioned the fact that when your first thoughts are based on what you already know. So the first answer that has this wonderful feeling of knowing, that's what psychologists call it, feeling of knowing. When you get an answer, the first thought that comes to mind, it feels good because you've finished with that uncomfortable process. That's a danger right there. You're kind of lured into thinking you have the answer before you even have done sufficient research or thinking about it. And the second thing is, I think by most measures, by most people's opinions, certainty is a closing down but also it's a certain type of thinking, it's a certain type of mindset that doesn't allow you to be open to new answers. That's why I actually like to kind of stay away from that idea of certainty. People often say to me, "Well, we need certainty, love is certain and you love your children and death is certain and et cetera, et cetera." Well, first of all, there's a lot that is uncertain, even within the things that we feel solid about, that we have conviction about. I think that when we can begin to describe answers and the search for knowledge and the pursuit of goodness or truth or et cetera as processes that allow for new evidence, that allow for listening to others, that are a little bit more open to life's dynamic possibilities, that's not certainty in my book. That's conviction and solidity and even prediction. But I think that it's really important to kind of distinguish between those two.
It's almost, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost motivated by fear more than it is by growth. I'm afraid of being uncertain, so I'm going to opt for something that's certain just because it feels better, because I'm afraid of what it might feel like to be uncertain. So I'll opt for this thing. Does that make sense, or am I missing the boat, do you
It
think?
does. I think certainty can be driven by ideology, it can be driven by fear, but at the bottom line, certainty is very often linked to closed-mindedness, to rigid thinking. In fact, that personality trait that I mentioned, tolerance of uncertainty, it means that it's a sort of spectrum of openness to uncertainty. And people who are highly intolerant of uncertainty are inflexible thinkers. They see things in black and white. They drive to certainty, and they want an answer, any answer, as one scientist told me.
Right, exactly. I'll take the wrong answer if it makes me feel certain, even though it may not be the right one because it feels good. Now and it's countercultural to some extent what we're talking about, because when you think of a leader, you think of General Patton or some guy on a horse who's got a direction and we're going to follow the direction. But what you found was that uncertain leaders are actually more effective. And you talked about the importance of adaptive experts, people who are able to adapt in circumstances. So they would make experiments, they'd try things, they'd redirect. We want in our minds, like our image of a leader is decisive and clear, and this is where we're going to go. But what your research found is actually uncertainty leads to better leadership. Can you want to say a bit more about that?
We so often move through life um, seamlessly by operating on what we know. That's called predictive processing. So when you drive home, your house is going to be in the same place. You assume it is, you know it is. That's a kind of predictability of life. Very much a lot of life is like that. You know how to exit a highway, you know how to make a cup of coffee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, when you do meet up with the new ambiguous and the unexpected, that's when a prediction error occurs and your brain is sort of jolted out of this autopilot. That's what uncertainty is. So, just to push that idea a little bit further, when we become expertise, we're actually honing our knowledge into becoming second nature. The doctor walks into the room and knows just what to do. Same with the CEO and the teacher, etc. What they're doing is relying on mental models that allow them to see a situation and then apply a solution that's worked in the past. Bingo. But the trouble is, that doesn't work in unpredictable situations, which is why leaders and experts very often keep on resting on their old knowledge, fighting that last battle, etc. And that's where the trouble starts. Adaptive expertise really has just been discovered in the last 10 or 15 years for complex reasons related to how the science of expertise has been carried out. But in any case, it's really exciting because adaptive experts are a whole nother order, a higher echelon of expertise. And what they do is basically three things. I discovered through a lot of research and actually embedding myself in operating rooms in Canada to study
Hmm.
surgeons as a kind of illustration of this type of adaptive expertise. Adaptive experts inhabit the question, so they actually try to be uncertain a little bit, allow themselves to be uncertain. They don't race through to jump on an answer that was based on the past. They secondly widen their options, they widen the frame of their understanding, and they thirdly deepen the frame of their understanding. So they're looking at multiple options, again, even in just a few minutes, and testing them, maybe mentally, maybe actually in execution, testing a new product, testing
Right.
a new idea, etc. But this is really important because their knowledge is not just applied over and over again, it's extended, it's constantly growing. And that's the core of adaptive expertise, which is not just a way to approach a crisis, it's also a way to approach your entire career. These are the experts that take on harder problems all the time. So again, they can push themselves, they work at the edge. That's one reason I call uncertainty edge work. So this is a really important kind of overturning. If you begin to think about that, it changes what it means to be a leader. And I've talked to doctors, psychologists, business leaders, and others who begin to get this and practice this, who know what adaptive expertise is, and they say it changes what it means to be an expert. They become less the authority defending their prowess and treating knowledge like a rock that they hold and defend,
Right.
and become more of a partner in care, a perpetual learner, the doctor who doesn't mind the question from the patient, etc. It's really an exciting new way to approach learning, growth, and leadership.
It's exactly the way we do coaching. I was really influenced by Ron Heifetz, and he's a leadership. I'm sure you know the leadership expert at Harvard, and he says that the biggest mistake leaders can make is to confuse technical challenges with adaptive challenges. So trying to apply a recipe to an adaptive challenge. An adaptive challenge, as you said, is one where you have to make experiments. You have to try different things. But an adaptive response isn't just talking about it; it's actually acting and reflect. It's almost like learning in action. We're going to see what happens, and we'll make adjustments. And so our coaches work with teachers. The teachers set a goal, then they try a plan. It almost never works. They have to make adjustments and modifications. They have to, what if I change? Maybe it's not the questions, maybe it's the activity the kids are doing, or maybe they need to do more compelling thinking prompts or something. And so the coach is an adaptive expert. I love that terminology. And I think in coaching, the way we would put it, and I learned this from somebody I interviewed, but her phrase was, we have expertise. We just don't act like experts. We act like partners, and I think that's a good way of putting it. But to be an adaptive expert doesn't mean you don't act. You're actually heavily engaged in action. You're moving forward. I think sometimes people dismiss this because I think, oh, you're just going to sit around and talk about things and not do something. No, the work is in the doing.
Exactly. And one study I came across, which is a gold standard award-winning study done in Europe, proves this really well. CEOs who were undergoing a major expansion of the European union marketplace, a doubling in the marketplace, were studied a year before it occurred and then afterwards. And it turns out, to the researchers' shock, the CEOs who were most adaptive, who were, successful under this very difficult crisis situation, were the ones who are ambivalent about what would happen ahead of time. They didn't feel like they were in control of the situation entirely. They also said, they weren't sure whether this was a good or bad for their company. They were going to adapt, and they turned out to be more inclusive. They saw multiple perspectives on the situation, and then they were more resourceful, which means, inventive, and they were adaptive, and it has all the flavor of improvisation and experimentation and keeping your mind open. But yeah, you're right, not acting. And here's the key, and why it's so interesting. We equate uncertainty with inertia, but at the same, these CEOs who were ambivalent were anything but inactive. It turned out that in this way, the CEOs who thought they were in control or thought this was all good or all bad turned out to be the ones who did almost nothing at all. So
Mm.
actually, it's certainty that's far more like inertia than uncertainty. That's so important.
That's a really, really great point. There's another thing I want to explore, the coaching connection with this, because when we do coaching, we help the teacher get a bigger picture of reality, and we think expanding your view. And there are all kinds of reasons why you don't see reality very clearly. Confirmation bias and other things like that, and defense mechanisms, and also part of it is just the impulse for certainty. But once you've got a bigger picture of reality, then you set a goal, and then the goal becomes a compelling movement forward. The teacher sets a goal they really want to hit. And so we talk about the whole process being pulled forward by that emotionally compelling goal that the teacher hits. But you talk about the dangers of fixating on a particular outcome. So could you say more about this? Because I think this can expand our understanding of what coaching really could be.
Right, and I think that's such an important point. We always want a goal, of course. We want to keep a higher order goal in mind in a project, or when we're dealing with an uncertain situation like today's business climate, or in a classroom or a dynamic situation like that. You always want a goal. But a lot of studies across, again, different disciplines have shown that outcome fixation, that is, fixating too much on the outcome, and that's a little bit different than the goal, is actually leads to performance declines, either in the moment. It could be when you're giving a presentation, or it could be during one of these, difficult projects or crisis kind of situations, as the CEOs in Europe were experiencing. So outcome fixation, what does that mean? I'll just use the very simple illustration example from giving a presentation. You're in the moment, you're challenged, you feel watched, you want to do an excellent job, but you keep thinking, how am I doing? Or, oh, there's someone in the room that's glowering at me, or you're kind of thinking, I'm going to be bombing, or sometimes in professional sports, studies have showed that people fixate on outcome through fixating at the reward, the bonus or the trophy at the end of the time. This really radically undermines our performance. Well, it makes sense, because instead of being open to the uncertainty, to be alive, to be, in, kind of leaning into that arousal mode, that good stress, and then therefore being more in tune with the environment, you're actually siphoning your cognitive resources away from the moment and focusing on something that's, you're getting the cart before the horse in all ways. And so that outcome fixation is really, really dangerous. And it's so related to anxiety. One way people can help combat outcome fixation is to also take a page from athletics and use something called cue words. I've talked to Fortune 100 leaders and others about this. Um, Big athletes, top athletes use cue words in a game, for instance, just to say focus now or in the game. They just make up a little phrase that they say to themselves when they find their mind straying to outcome, and those worries. And then that helps them be in the moment. This is why uncertainty, I call it a form of honesty. And it's also highly related to mindfulness, because you are in the moment, in its totality. You're not running, hiding, trying to escape from what's now.
So I think from the coaching perspective, that means the way I'm interpreting it is that it's not a bad thing to have goals, but the goals should be held loosely. And those goals can be as you're moving through uh, unpredictable circumstances, you may realize I thought this was my concern, and this is really what it needs to be. And to some extent, we try to address that up front by getting a a broader picture of reality. Um, One person I interviewed said it's like in Hitchcock movies. When you watch the film, you think the movie's going to be about this, and you're all, I think it's called the MacGuffin effect. You think it's going to be about this, but it ends up being about something completely different. And that's often what happens with coaching. I thought I wanted to focus on this, but now as I do this, this is what's happening.
Isn't life just like that? You
Yep.
think I mean, every book I've ever written has been, the genesis has been starting with a question that I thought was really important. For instance, what does it mean to think well in the digital age? Or what is a home in the digital age? Or how can we, deal with technology? That question ended up to be very important for the distracted book, but the book was really about attention.
Mm.
And so technology was what led me there. So always, if we are open to the real story of what's going on, and then have the bendability to flex, well, that has everything to do with positive uncertainty, productive uncertainty.
So one of the things you talk about is that conflict can be a good thing. We try to shy away from conflict, but that actually conflict, positive conflict, if you want to put it that way. And I think you use the term, if I've got it right, productive zones of disagreement. Did I get that right?
Yes, yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually the productive zone of disagreement, and I also call it uncommon ground. We should be
Okay.
fighting for uncommon ground.
Right. Well, tell us more about that, because I do think it probably goes back to neuroscience again. We want to have we shy away from or try to avoid conflict, but healthy conflict can be a really good thing. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Exactly. And it is surprising. I mean, we all know that groupthink is not good, and that, moving along as teammates, as being sheepishly moving along in stride, march step with one another is not a good thing. But I had no idea the extent to which agreement very quickly moves a group into some really unproductive habits, even if the group is highly diverse. So teams that are, or um, groups that are in agreement, even for a short time, become less accurate, less creative, and don't challenge one another. Any group that's in agreement tends to talk about what everybody already knows. There it is. That's the shadow side of knowing. Again, what occurs when you air differences in respectful way, when you allow arguments or dissenting voices, is that you're really able to jolt the team into a more questioning, skeptical mindset, AKA productive uncertainty. How do we know this? Well, the most wonderful piece of evidence is that airing differences and dissenting voices help boost good collaboration. They make teams more accurate, creative, et cetera, et cetera. But this is true even when the dissenting voice is wrong. So someone raises their hand and disagrees, throws a wrench into that agreement that I call the love seat of accord. Everyone's just really happy to be together. It's comfortable. It's easy. They throw that wrench in, and it doesn't matter if they were technically correct or not. They're still jolting people from their assumptions, which is exactly what uncertainty is. We're jolting ourselves, day to day through prediction error, through adaptive expertise, jolting ourselves away from our assumptions and our old, tried and true, outdated information and knowledge, and you're moving into that zone of productive disagreement, which is built on fueled by uncertainty. So I studied the the teams at NASA that put the rovers on Mars, and 20% of their uh, conversations between engineers and scientists and computer programs and everything, 20% of their conversations involved micro conflicts, and 100% of those micro conflicts involved expressions of uncertainty. And sociologists and others told me that's why this team is one of the most innovative in space history. They were able to put those robots on Mars, which is an unbelievable feat, because they drew out uncertainty. And I'll just mention one other thing. Uncertainty does two things, especially in conversation and linguistics. So using the word maybe, for instance, does two things. First, it indicates receptivity on the part of the speaker. So this links to good leadership, in ways that we don't expect it, and it also links to good collaboration. People use the word maybe, or we consider that to be kind of a weak, taboo
Mhm.
thing in leaderships or in groups, but actually they're considered more receptive to others' points of view, and they're signaling that there's something more to know. That's where we want to be as a learner and as collective learners. So it's really amazing. And of course, sadly, in today's society, people hire for fit and they tamp down, they fear the friction of diversity and dissent, and we really need to be cultivating it.
Yeah, it's a paradox or something. The idea that we want clarity, we want strength and power, but it's actually more courageous and more powerful to say maybe than it is to be definitive. And it's interesting too that your research you mentioned said that uncertain people get more things done, which is kind of an interesting part of it too. You talk about this in relationships too, that the impulse for certainty can lead us to label people and see them as stereotypes and then really miss out on who they are. So could you say a tiny bit about how uncertainty applies to the way we relate to other people?
Yes, yes. I think I try to look at relationships in two ways. First of all, our unsureness can help us bridge to the people we oppose or politically disagree
Right.
with, or stereotype. And then also, the unsureness can help us counteract that agreement, which is kind of like an opiate of groups, our side and the other side. It can help us in both ways. We are literally categorizers as humans. The mind categorizes everything, including each other, as in group or out group, as us or them. And we do it really quickly, and it has cascading effects so that you actually end up dehumanizing and paying less attention, literally, to others who aren't like who your mind deems unlike you. It's very unconscious. Well, one way we can again jolt ourselves away from this categorization is to one simple strategy is to take the perspective of another. Perspective taking is a very, very, very powerful tool for being willing to engage with others. If you are against, immigrants coming to this country, and you just try to take the perspective of what it's like to be a refugee or an immigrant, you will be more likely to be willing to work with them, to engage with them. I mean, this is done in field studies, etc. So this simple act of taking their perspective, it's not empathy, it's cognitive empathy, not like I feel what they feel. But that really paves the way for the engagement that then lowers prejudice. And that couldn't be more important right now. And perspective taking is there's no right or wrong. You're really just taking a leap of imagination. It's all uncertain. How you know what a refugee is like, what their day is like, etc. It's really very much an act of uncertainty. Again, it's a self-imposed jolting from our shaking ourselves up, jolting ourselves from our certainties, and then lets you learn and be and cultivate mutual understanding.
It's really being open to learning is really, in a way, one way that's oversimplifying it, but it's being curious, being open to learning, expanding and approaching others and the world from a place of humility, like, I haven't got it all figured out. I can learn more. I think that's just really, really cool.
And also, it's really important to emphasize that, again, sometimes the popular assumption is that moderates in politics or people who are perspective takers or et cetera are kind of wishy-washy inactive, but that is not borne out in politics. People who are more willing to see other sides, who are more willing to, in other words, be uncertain about others who are different from them, are just as politically engaged, and they also have tremendous conviction. If you're highly tolerant of uncertainty as a sort of personality trait, you are actually show no less conviction in arguments. This is not about being vanilla. This is not about being inactive. It's really about standing up for being, uncertainty allows you to stand up for what's right while adjusting what right is.
I love it. That's great. Just as kind of a conclusion, one of my favorite phrases in your book is that uncertainty is wisdom in motion. I think that's how the phrase goes. Could you say a bit more about what that means, just to kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, that's interesting, because people around the world have picked up on that somehow. Oh, it is the phrase from the book that people talk about and post about and just find that that is the takeaway in some ways. I guess I sort of that came to me as I was in the middle of writing the book as a phrase just to indicate how active and dynamic uncertainty is. When you're unsure, you are ready, you're primed, you're flexible, you're open, you're curious, you really are uh, so much more able to take on the dynamism of the world, contend with, etc. And so I think the idea of uncertainty as wisdom and motion is my little pushback on the idea that not only wisdom but uncertainty particularly are static and inert. It couldn't be the farther from the truth.
Well, I'm a little nervous that I'm feeling really certain that uncertainty is the way to go. So I'm gonna have to think about that. But is there anything else you'd like to add that you think is important that we've missed that would be important to include?
The only thing I'd add is I've mentioned this tolerance of uncertainty, intolerance of uncertainty. We all sit somewhere on the spectrum. And the good news is a lot of scientific work is showing that you can bolster your tolerance of uncertainty and therefore your resilience and mental well being in a kind of fearful world through simple daily exercises. Just basically, it's kind of a riff on exposure therapy, but just try on a little bit more of the unknown. One actual exercise that psychologists use to bolster resilience in young people is to have them answer their phone without caller ID, without screening.
Mm.
And these little things like try a new dish at a restaurant, delegate more, let your kids pack their suitcase. It might not be, a fantastic success, but it likely isn't always going to be a disaster when you cede a little control. And then you gain practice in the unknown, incremental, and you find the joy of meeting the world with wonder and curiosity. So I would just say try on a little bit of the unknown every day as coaches, as people who are learning, and as leaders, as teachers. I think we'll all be a little better off.
Well, I love it. And I love the book. It's wise and useful and deep and helpful. It's going to lead to a better life. I really think it really does. And it does it in ways that are just intellectually stimulating for me. So I'm so grateful for it. I think it's especially relevant for anybody who's a coach or a leader in their situation to be 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 cautious about moving forward to in too certain a way. I think to always be curious, always be learning, and that's what the book's all about. So thank you so much, Maggie. I've really loved the conversation.
It was a great conversation, and thank you for your careful and considered questions and all of your observations. I've learned a lot.
Well, it's been fun.